Welcome to Mr. and Mrs. Creeps. Tonight's story is about two medics who are left running for their lives after an encounter with creatures not of this world. Paramedic Andrew Wise was enjoying the unseasonably warm weather with his window cracked while he sipped the worst hot cup of gas station coffee. He glanced at the clock on the dash. It was 2:45 a.m. So far, the night was slow, with only one call, which didn't require his skills, but rather his partner's. He wished it was more active, but he was also thankful that it wasn't. Sarah sat in the driver's seat, medical book in her lap, and sandwich in her hand. She was enjoying the lull in activity so she could continue to study. She didn't want to be a basic EMT forever, and Lord knows she could use the bump in pay. She smiled at Andrew and innocently said, "Man, it's quiet tonight." Andrew instantly tensed. He has 15 years on the job and knows that some words you just never say. Sarah took the first bite of her sandwich, and right on cue, a call came over the radio.
238, responding for 55-year-old male. Chest pains with difficulty breathing. 7692 Tall Plains Road, Big Break, State Route 33, and Greenbrier.
Andrew shot Sarah a stern look while picking up the mic.
238 en route.
10-4, en route, 248.
Sarah put her sandwich in the cup holder and threw her book in the pocket behind her seat and pulled out of their hideaway behind the gas station. The address was at least 7 minutes away in the hills of the mountains. She put on the lights and sirens and pushed the bounds of the speed limit on the straightaways, while Andrew kept a lookout for deer. About 4 minutes later, they arrived at the intersection of State Route 33 and Greenbrier. Andrew navigated them to Tall Pines Road, and Sarah turned on the floodlights. Andrew muttered,
"No one ever has their address clearly labeled."
As they slowly drove, they passed 7690, and then they came upon 7694. But where was 7692? Sarah pulled over, and Andrew called dispatch. They tried to reach the number the caller left, but it was disconnected. Sarah Googled the address, but it didn't find a location, and the satellite images showed only a field and woods. Andrew got out of the cab and scanned up and down the road, hoping to find a flattened piece of earth showing where cars might be traveling in and out. But he saw nothing. He heard a faint clicking sound come from deep within the woods, and then he heard a man yelling for help. He yelled back to the man, but it was like the man couldn't hear him, and he just continued to yell,
"Help! Help me!"
Andrew updated dispatch, and they made it clear that he and Sarah were to stage until police got there. But there was such panic in that man's voice that Andrew knew he couldn't just walk away and wait. Sarah got out of the cab, went to the back, and got her bag. She walked over and stood with Andrew. "We're going, right?" He nodded and said,
Yep.
238, advise confirm staging.
Andrew leaned into the cab and picked up the mic.
238, negative on staging. Patient seems urgent. Will continue on foot and rendezvous with Leo upon arrival.
238, 10-4, status checks every 3 minutes.
238, 10-4.
238, on scene, 257.
Andrew grabbed his paramedic bag, hooked the handheld radio to his belt, and they stepped away from the safety of their rig. It was still early in the spring, so the vegetation was sparse except for the evergreens. The sticks and leaves crunched under their boots and the extra weight from their jump bags. They heard the man call out again, but this time it was louder.
Help! Help me!
Good, Andrew thought. We're getting closer to him and we aren't that far from the road. He called out to him.
Hello? We're here to help. Where are you?
The clicking sounds that Andrew heard before, he heard again, but this time they were much louder. He wondered if it was some kind of animal that might have caused harm to this man who was yelling for help. So they both stopped and listened. The radio broke their silence.
238, advise status.
And Andrew clicked on the radio.
238, just off the side of the road. Patient sounds closer. Going to continue.
238, 10-4, 0300.
Help! Help me!
The voice cried out again. Sarah pointed to a clearing just beyond a stone wall. They made their way over to the 4-foot wall. It was crudely made with stones still covered in the dirt that they were pulled from, but it seemed solid, so Andrew climbed up and over. And Sarah had to throw her bag over first to make sure she could get over without falling on her face. Andrew called out again, but the man no longer responded. And as they walked farther and farther from the road, he became more frustrated. He did not want to turn back when he knew someone needed help, but at a certain point, that decision would have to be made. Breaking him from his thoughts and stopping them both in their tracks, that sound again. And it sent shivers down their spine.
238, advise status.
Andrew clicked the handheld mic.
238, preparing to turn to the rig. Patient no longer calling out and unable to locate.
238, 10-4, 0303.
Neither one of them wanted to leave someone in distress out alone in the cold and the dark. With the radio check and the Leos on the way, there was a sense of security as they pushed the bounds into this unknown situation, even if it was a false security. Sarah continued and walked ahead of Andrew, calling out as loud as she could, one more time. But nothing. As she turned and she asked Andrew, what was that sound? And Andrew was honest.
I don't know. I've never heard anything like that before, but I also don't spend time in the woods, so I don't know.
The trees began to creak and groan just at the edge of the clearing as if the wind had picked up. And Andrew stood fixed on that spot, trying to sort it out. This is no good, he thought. And we gotta get out of here. And they both stumbled back, and a flash of light pierced the darkness. Brilliant orange and soft yellow, whites and pinks. From where they stood, about 10 feet ahead of them, the night gave way to this strange illumination. It looked as if the sky in front of them just ripped open and revealed this brilliant light show, and their curiosity gave way to trepidation. as a long black mass appeared to step out of this tear in space, followed by another long black mass, and then finally an entire creature stepped right into this world, right in front of Andrew and Sarah. It was massive, easily 10 feet tall. The legs were long and narrow and very dark. The arms were lanky and spindle-like. The body was rectangular but black definition, and the head was oval with this brilliant golden amber-colored eyes that seemed to glow. And the creature was darker than black. It seemed to absorb the light that surrounded it. It had a hybrid gait as it walked, sometimes on 2 extremities and sometimes on 4. It slowly made its way to the right of the clearing, taking great care to observe its surroundings with each step. And then a second creature came out of the portal of light, the same size, the same shape, moved in the same way. And this one took position to the left of the clearing. And they were holding space for something, which filled Andrew with dread. What was coming next? Then a third creature oozed out of the portal, and it was much larger and thicker. The head was reminiscent of an eagle, and Andrew reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm. He needed physical contact to keep himself steady and grounded. He needed to know that she was seeing the same thing. And she didn't move the entire time he held her arm. And then finally snapping back into reality, and he realized how much danger they were in, he put his bag down gently, and he took a few steps back. And the creatures didn't seem to notice. And Sarah followed his lead, and they made their way backward, further into the darkness of the night, seeking shelter behind a thicket.
238, advice status.
Internally, Andrew said every swear word in the English language while fumbling to get the radio off his belt and turn it off. The creatures, now focused in their direction, stood tall. They were so tall. And the one in the center let out this piercing shriek that caused Sarah to cover her ears. And the 2 sentinels sprung forward with amazing speed. And Andrew could hear and feel their massive feet striking the ground as they moved over the rough terrain like smoke. Andrew held his breath till his lungs burned, his racing heart now lodged in his throat. Sarah was still holding her hands to her head, curled up in a ball, but Andrew did not take his eyes off those creatures. He watched every forward movement they made. They keyed in on their bags, and they made a beeline straight for him, circling them like a pack of wild dogs circle their prey. And Andrew saw his opportunity. He turned the radio back on, and he threw it as hard as he could in the direction that the creatures came from. And with divine timing, as soon as that radio hit the ground, dispatch called out for a status update, and the creatures snapped up from the bags and they took off in pursuit. And Andrew's eyes traveled from the 2 sentinels to the massive creature that came through the portal last, and to his horror, it was staring straight at him. He had not fooled this one.
"Get up, Sarah. Go now," he screamed.
and they ran as fast as they could through the field, their feet trying to maintain the grip with the bumps and the dips of the terrain. And Andrew had an advantage, so he outpaced her. They could hear the sentinel creatures behind them in pursuit. Sarah's lungs ached to keep up with the pace and the fear, and her boots were so heavy, and she didn't feel like she was moving at all in comparison to these creatures' ability to glide effortlessly over the earth. She looked back, and she saw that third creature spread enormous wings and shoot into the night sky, diving straight for them at the apex of its launch. That's it, she thought. I'm going to die. Andrew made it to the stone wall, and he easily made his way up to the top. He sat there, straddling both sides, bracing himself, waiting for Sarah. And she knew what he was going to do, and she loved him for it. And she dug down deep and picked up the pace, placed one foot at the base of the wall, and jumped into the air, her outreached hands locked with his, and he flung her over the wall just as the creatures crashed into it, causing them both to fly backwards and hit the ground hard. And they scrambled to their feet, rushing towards the road. And the woods here were so dark that it was hard to see more than a foot in front of them, and they slowed their pace from sprinting to jogging. They didn't hear the creatures pursuing them, but it was hard to hear anything over their gasping for air and their heartbeats. Finally, they saw the ambulance, and they heard sirens close by. As they emerged from the woods, the police were getting out of their cruiser.
What's wrong?
The officer yelled with his hand on his gun. Andrew was able to get out between big gulps of air.
I'm not sure if you'd believe me if I told you.
And Sarah snapped, "Shh!"
Help! Help me!
The ominous voice called once again, and Andrew screamed no at the top of his lungs, and laughter could be heard from deep in the woods. The sky lit up bright orange and then plunged into darkness, and after several minutes, the comforting sounds of crickets and frogs could be heard. Andrew had been so focused on that call for help that it never occurred to him how silent the landscape was before they ventured out. One of the officers, an older man, stared at the two medics.
I grew up in these woods. It was real stupid of you two to head out there without any help. Many people go missing here, and many are never seen again. And those who do make it back, well, they tell stories of hearing someone call for help. It's like the call of a siren luring you in. Professionally, these are missing people who probably succumbed to the elements or wildlife, but personally, I think these people are some kind of sacrifice. Not many people come up here anymore, which is most likely why you got a call for an emergency to an address and a phone number that doesn't exist. The locals here have respect for this land, and I've learned to have respect for the ancient teachings. They've placed barriers made from the soil, like mounds or rock formations, to keep whatever is taking people contained. You're lucky you made it back.
And Andrew and Sarah just stood there in silence, trying to reconcile what had just happened. What were they going to tell people? Lost in thought, they heard the radio.
238, advise status.
And Andrew reached into the cab of the ambulance and grabbed the mic.
238. Back in service.
Thank you for listening. Good night, sleep tight under starry skies until morning light.